Welcome everybody to our new look VODcast for a very late 2018. I'm joined for this first one by Mr. Eric Helden. Thanks for joining me, Eric.
No problem. This was fun. This will be fun.
Yeah, this is. I'm in the US. Eric's in Belgium, so we've
Yeah.
got most of the continents covered. This is going to be sort of a quick fire episode today. 25 minutes is what we're aiming for. So I thought we'll start by talking about changes that are going to be coming to this group. And the first one that we've been discussing and we're going to put to the group is the change to the league name.
Yeah, this is something I proposed because I think I've been calling the original league, the one where all other leagues came from, like with 101 different names because I don't know how to call it. Like every name I found was somewhat confusing. Apparently, it was called the Players League, but doesn't really describe well what the league is, and so both as a means to better define the league and as a means to like better promote the league, because I think it's something awesome. Like I wanted to change it to a bit more grander, a bit more grand name. So that's why I proposed the Grand League. Now we've got different other names going out there, so we'll probably ask the group a bit about how they feel about the name.
Yeah, what actually brought this about is we had the league, which is about to start its 8th season, but Nathan Blewett runs the Super League, which I believe is going to start its third or fourth season, and you've also been running a pretty successful Standard League. So as moderators and so on, when we talk about the league, it's not really clear anymore what we're talking about.
It's actually like in the beginning we had different kinds of events, we had like the monthly tourneys and all that stuff, and then we slowly started realizing exactly the popularity of your league, and we also noticed that it was I as a moderator noticed that it was somewhat better way to do it, better way to moderate events, because it didn't have some of the issues that we had with like weekly events or monthly events, and because of that we started kind of adopting it for all kinds of other events. Like we wanted still to offer several types of stuff that you could participate in, and that made it kind of confusing.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is come up with probably three potential names and just see what other people think. My personal preference is to just call it, I think I said Grand Champion League, because the person that wins it is the Grand Champion.
Yeah, that's also probably my like second choice, because it's somewhat long, which means I somewhat prefer just the Grand League, but probably I'll just let the Grand League slide and just choose for Grand Champion League as one of the three. I will still have to discuss more which the other two will be with the mod team, but probably pretty soon you will see a poll in the group about how to rename.
Yeah, and moving along, the other poll that we might be putting to the group is changes to the Patreon. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so with Patreon, it first started off as like a means to fund our server. Now it was pretty popular, so we were able to offer some prizes. But after a while, it gets pretty hard to think of new, exciting, and creative prizes for our raffles. And like our events have also gone down a bit in number because sometimes our mods are busy, and like that made it a bit less ideal. There's also less interest in the Patreon right now, so we're thinking of somewhat downsizing it for the current time, and perhaps like starting it back up later when we have more events or something like that.
Yeah, just to shed a bit further light on that, our Patreon support has been dwindling. So, and I put this down to a number of reasons, but we've lost roughly, I think it's about 30% support in terms of both the money we take in each month and the number of people that actually support us. I think this is for two reasons. One is because of our lack of events that are going on, and I think I have to take a fair amount of blame for that, because
I'm not sure blame there is the right choice. You're doing enough. It's just that we don't have enough other Matthews around to start.
Yeah, and I took the 2.5 months. I had to go overseas for 2.5 months, and I think that kind of caused a lot of disruptions and sort of recordings and so on. But the other thing that sort of happened at the same time was MTG Arena, and so our events have been a bit more quiet. We are sort of starting them up again, but one thing that's sort of came out of the previous discussion about the Grand Champion League, well, I'll just call it that for now, is that people want to play around rotations and new sets. So the next season's potentially not starting until January 25, which is still some time away. So we just didn't have in terms of the Patreon, we want to give you something for your value for your money, so to speak. And we do have some savings that can fund our group server and website at least for another year. So one potential that we're looking at is to suspend collecting Patreon funds and calling for voluntary donations in the future when we require it. But at the same time, that's not a given. We're going to sort of probably solicit advice from the group and see what others think about that as well, because I believe there are some Patreons that would just be happy to keep contributing.
Yeah, and definitely I think we're going to try and keep events going, and I'm also trying to start up some old efforts, because I'm not actually sure when I stopped doing them, but I think that's just because life kind of got in the way. But now I'm starting to get a bit more on track, and that allows me more time to try and find ways to do that. But I don't want to kind of offer raffles for one event that happened, and then only the people who won or played in that event have chance for raffles. I want it to be we offer several events, and then we reward those who participate, and that, and we create an active environment in our group. That's my ideal, and I think the reason why we wanted to offer raffles was that, except of course next to of course rewarding our patrons for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of events and new events and so on, I thought we'd tell us a bit about your standard league that's been going on, because I sort of take time off from the so-called Grand Champion League. I step back, but I have noticed quite a few posts, and it seems to be running quite successfully. How's it going?
Yeah, so the Standard League was fairly small, but overall good success, I think, especially because it seems that there is long-term interest in it. And it started out somewhat as someone requested a standard-only league, so I fired it off during one of the off seasons.
How many players do you currently have?
I think 12 in total. So it's pretty small. It's 6 from America and 6 from Europe. But it was actually pretty handy in that we had 5 Euro players, 5 American players, and 2 people from the Asian region. So it was super handy to make equal leagues.
You don't run into the problems of time zone differences.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not one league is bigger than the other, so one league has to wait for the other, which we have had several times in the Grand Champion League. And one of the things that now comes forward of it is that I actually enjoyed it myself as somewhat of a testing ground for new standards. So that's where I see the future of Standard League, is that with every new set that comes out, we start up a new league that might not be as big as the other leagues, might not be that huge, but it's just a fun place to try and test out new decks in a new meta.
Yeah, and I was going to say, do you think the success of your current Standard League is tied to the quality of Guilds of Ravnica?
Oh, probably it is tied to the quality of Standard. I mean, that's general with events, and I think there's a lot of fun decks right now, and that does increase interest somewhat. But On the other hand, I also think that it might be somewhat like the how fun standard is now will probably influence how many people want to join the standard league for Ravnica allegiances. Like that's probably going to be a factor because, of course, those who join at the start of this league were actually people who were already interested in playing standard before Guilds of Ravnica standard was really there. But on the other hand, probably the rotation and the big changes that were coming to this format was an interesting aspect of joining the standard league. So that's something.
Yeah, and I must admit, I hadn't played standard for a number of years. Like even in the Grand Champion leagues, I would just kind of net deck something, and or I'd pick up. I think I picked up you were playing around with a black white vampires deck, so I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'll just run that each week. I didn't particularly care about my standard results, but I just played it because it's part of the competition. But with Guilds of Ravnica, suddenly I got interested in standard again, and even at my LGS, I've actually bought into this new standard, and we're getting 20 plus people to a standard showdown each week, so it's pretty cool at the moment.
That reminds me, I think there have been like more standard events firing at my LGS as well, because for a long time nobody was interested in standard. And for some reason this comes at the cost of our modern events, which were really popular when standard was bad.
Yeah, I mean, my LGS, it runs, its F&M is pretty expensive. They charge about $10 entry, where a standard showdown is $5, and for some reason he doesn't want to run standard F&M as standard, so you get really small numbers for the other formats, and you're getting double for standard. And I think one of the reasons is when you, as you mentioned before, and you can probably speak more to this than I can, but it just seems like Guilds of Ravnica, you got so many different deck choices, and they're not necessarily expensive. You can build on a budget and be competitive.
I think that's definitely one of the reasons why for paper events this has been increased, but it's actually kind of ironical that exactly at this point where standard is becoming more fun and more budgets, I have kind of been moving away from standard in paper because I now have a commander play group with my brother and some friends, and like I have spent so much money on standard and not played enough because I live pretty far from my LGS, like movement wise. So it's kind of fun. But on the other hand, that makes me have more fun in the standard league because that's something I can do from home.
Yeah,
and where I can still experiment with a new meta.
Yeah, and I also wonder about the connection between MTG Arena and Standard, like how many new players it's brought in and how many people want to play Standard because of Arena, and so on.
Yeah, that's definitely. I actually wonder about that, like how much Magic Gathering Arena would bring in new players to Standard.
Because I've been reading about GP Warsaw, which happened last week, I think, and apparently they were just inundated with players that they just weren't expecting, and the event sold out. I haven't been to Poland, and I went to Poland about 13 years ago, and it was a pretty dour and slow place back then. And I would never have imagined I'd get 1,200 people to an event. But yeah, it sold out. They got swamped. They couldn't handle the numbers, and apparently a ton of them were registering new DCIs, which Wizards attributed to MTG Arena popularity. So interesting.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see in the future with more events like.
Yeah. Okay, moving along, I'm going to put forward now a new segment that we want to add to this VODcast each week. I'm calling it Quirky Cards. So this is how it works. Myself or a guest or another host is going to put forward a card. It can't be something obvious. It has to be something that's not sort of mainstream in a particular format, to tell you why we think it's playable and where we think it's playable, and see if we can convince you or not. So I'm going to go first this week. The card I've chosen is from Origins. It's Hallowed Moonlight, 1 white, +1 colorless, instant, and if a creature would enter the battlefield and it was not cast. Let me just bring up the Scryfall so I get this exactly right. It's an instant, as I mentioned. Until the end of the turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, you exile it instead, and you draw a card. I see this as being particularly useful in Modern at the moment, particularly in decks that want to make use of their graveyard, but don't want to play graveyard hate. So I'm thinking particularly Snapcaster Mage decks, where you want to attack the other person's graveyard, and I think it's particularly strong against two styles of deck. One is the emergence of the Arclight Phoenix decks, the blue-red Phoenix, and also Dredge, and also the Vengevine decks. It'll exile every single creature that comes into play from that turn, and it can also be used against Ether Vial and Collected Company decks, whilst enabling you to still have your graveyard intact. So as I say, it's an instant, and it can be flashed back with Snapcaster as well. And so that's I've put it as a sideboard card, probably ideally in Jeskai control, because blue-white can certainly play after sideboard without a graveyard. They bring in Rest in Peace, but decks like Jeskai really need the graveyard, so I'm putting it there. So what are your thoughts on the card?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, because when I first saw it, I immediately was reminded of the Standard, where it was used as the sideboard card against, I think, Reality Ancestors decks. And there it was really effective. And it doesn't indeed... It's like... it's a one-time gauge, so it's a bit less effective if you're not going into the graveyard strategy, but if you are dependent on graveyard strategy, this might actually be a better card. Also, it kind of wheels, so it's never really a dead card. So, in fact, like, it's probably a sideboard card, but if a meta is really graveyard heavy, or heavy with both graveyard recurral like Dredge and creature decks with Collected Company, it might even be mainboard playable, because you can always just cycle it for 2 mana, so it's not a heavy cost to play it in mainboard. And I do think that it might see play in Modern, in the way you described it. Like,
yeah, one thing that's a bit confusing, because I think Arclight Phoenix was in 2 top 8 decks and actually won the SCG tour on the weekend. I'm looking at Scryfall, and the Arclight Phoenix actually reads, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast 3 or more source spells, return Arclight Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, Scryfall on the side where they have the text is slightly different. It says you may return Arclight Phoenix. So the card itself does not say you may, but the text that Scryfall has on the side says you may. So I'm not that familiar with how Scryfall works, whether that's an updated Gatherer line or...
well, it's independent, so probably it would be better to look it up at Gatherer if you want to be certain of which the effect of the card is.
Yeah, because there's some cards such as Prized Amalgam that they just trigger and they come in. It's not a may.
Yeah, Gatherer itself says just return, and it doesn't say may, so I think that's just basically wrong.
Yeah. So you're going to catch the Arclight Phoenixes then, because I know with Collected Company, for example, you just don't find anything. You cast your company, they cast Moonlight in response, and you just don't find anything, and so you don't exile any creatures.
But even if they don't find anything, it's definitely a big thing, because then they shuffle it back to the bottom of their library.
Yeah, and it kind of functions as a counter spell. Counter Collected Company, draw a card.
Yeah, they've basically lost their value for, you spend 2 mana to counter their 4 mana value. Yep. And it's a big card, so it's definitely useful.
Okay, well that was Quirky Cards. So for those listening, if you want to come on the VODcast, keep in mind a card that you might want to bring up next week. We're going to finish the episode now talking about some changes that Eric's sort of flagging for the future that he wants to bring back. So can you tell us a bit more about those?
So there were two event types that I kind of have been wanting to do again. I'm not sure exactly when I stopped doing them, but one of them is the constructed mini leagues, which is actually an evolvement of the constructed tourneys. Constructed tourneys had a couple of problems, like when to play, like it's kind of hard to find a time when everyone could play, and the mini league seemed like an elegant solution that was offered by one of our players, one of our members. So I'm going to try that one out again. Small leagues, probably Swiss style if we have 4 or more players, and just like hopefully 3 weeks or something that would take to finish them, and then we can. I'm thinking of doing one each month and having the people decide, the members decide with a poll which format, so that we can explore different formats like Dual Commander, like legacy, like vintage pauper, stuff like that. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring back was draft tourneys. I don't really see how you can put draft in the league, otherwise I'd have tried it.
Yeah,
but you kind of need 8 players for that.
Yeah, the big challenge is always coordinating people at the same time.
Yeah, so we would need to have like 8 players for a draft league. One of the changes that I would bring to it is probably set it on one specific time of the month, like the second Sunday of each month at a certain time. There will be a draft league. People can then plan for that draft league if they want draft tourney. That people can then plan for that draft tourney if they want to join it, and then the format would be decided by the winner of the previous draft tourney. So that would be probably fun if we can like reinstate that. But we've had a couple of problems with who organizes them and when to organize them and advertising on time. So I'm working out the kinks and details on how to avoid the problems that we've had before with these kind of tourneys.
Okay, well, thanks very much for filling us in on that. We've kind of reached the end of our time now. For those listening, we're always looking for guests to have on the show. Ideally, we want you to have a webcam and a mic. All you need to do for this is have Discord and your webcam, and we can take the rest of it from there. Also, for those that just listen, if there's any topic or question you want us to cover, please send us a message and we'll make sure we squeeze that in. So we hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks for joining me, Eric.
No problem. I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.